welcome everyone. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to @Grade Level Reading. On Facebook and Instagram, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow us at Reading by Third, and on LinkedIn, you can follow us at Campaign for GLR. Once again, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Leah Cruz, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce the conversation. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our moment to acknowledge our Leo sponsors. So your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but it helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. So thank you. And we would also like to acknowledge our enterprise, programmatic, and as well as our individual donors. Your support also helps us bring these conversations to you every Tuesday. We do have a few housekeeping tips we'd like to go over before we get started with the webinar today. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat if you've not already done so at the bottom of your screen. Share your name, your city, or your organization, however you want to identify yourself. Be sure to select everyone so that we all know who's in the room with us today. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to engage with the panelists both in the chat box as well as the Q&A box. We will dedicate a portion of the webinar to answering questions that you have for the panelists that you submit in that Q&A box. The webinar is being recorded. We're also being live streamed, and a link to the recording as well as any of the links and resources shared during the webinar will be shared with all registrants by the end of this week. And then lastly, we will have a brief on-screen survey that comes up about 10 or 15 minutes before the end of the session, and we highly encourage you to respond. This helps with our commitment to continuous improvement. And then the last bit from me is I just wanted to go over some of our upcoming sessions that we have before the end of the year. So you can join us next week during Thanksgiving week. We will have a special rebroadcast of one of our Beyond Decoding NAEP sessions. This is on the federal role in promoting efficacy, equity, and accountability. This features two former U.S. Secretaries of Education, along with other former members of the National Board for Education Sciences and additional educational research leaders. Then we will also have some new sessions coming on December 2nd, December 9th, and December 16th. On the 2nd, we have the next in this series, so the Parents as Curators of Their Children's Education series that you're participating in today. We'll have one on the 2nd on the implications of the new federal tax credit. We'll also have a Crucible of Practice salon on December 9th at 12:30, and that will feature some CGLR communities talking about leadership shifts and how to maintain core missions and motivations. And then we will also have a session on December 9th in the afternoon on health-related absences. So authors of the toolkit will actually engage with some district leaders and health professionals and discuss how to improve attendance by partnering together to improve health and well-being. So you can join us for all of these, including this partner session we have on December 16th with Fordham Institute. So that one is about catching the leaky pipeline for high-achieving low-income or HALO students. So we have all of these amazing sessions coming up before the end of the year somehow. And this was again to emphasize that December 2nd date. And now I will turn it over to Sierra Sanchez with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and she will get the actual session started today. Sierra?
Yes, thank you, Leah. And thank you everyone for hopping on for today's conversation. Really glad to see so many of you here already in the room with us. Always a good thing. Today, we are so proud to host our fourth webinar in this series, which explores why and how parents are increasingly curating their children's K-12 education through options including open enrollment, charters, homeschooling, and other ways. Today's session, Parents as Curators of Their Children's Education, the Promise and Potential of Microschools. We will be diving into these options of microschools, and panelists will share with us the state of microschools, how widespread it is, and how much it's growing, and who is choosing it and why. We will also hear from a few Microschools founders about their schools, including their curricular approach, the students and families they serve, and much more. Finally, our panelists will reflect on both the opportunities that they see for the growth of microschools, as well as implications for access and accountability that we should all be thinking about. And I don't want to take up too much time, so with that, I am very excited to introduce today's guests on the next slide. And as a reminder, the slides and bios were posted in the chat, and I will continue to post them for anyone who wants to look through. And like Leah said, we will also be sharing the recording and all resources, so keep an eye for that in case you miss anything. But like I said, we will be linking the full bios in the chat, so just going to share really briefly who we have. Lauren Covelli is the Associate Policy Reacher with RAND. Mary Jo Fairhead is founder and director with Onward Learning. Stephanie Harper is founder with Harper Educational Consulting, LLC, and Harper Learning Academy. Meredith Olson is CEO of Vela, and Don Soifer is CEO of the National Microschooling Center. Again, the full bios will be posted on the sheet in the chat box. And all of these discussions will be moderated by Chelsea Waite, principal with the Center on Reinventing Public Education, who you can see on the next slide. And with that, I am excited to welcome Chelsea and kick off the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sierra, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm so excited to be moderating this really stellar panel on microschooling today. We at the Center on Reinventing Public Education often say that public education is a goal, not a particular set of institutions. And microschools are a great example of this in practice because they're working towards many of the same goals that families and communities across our country have for their children, but doing so in many cases on the fringes or outside of public schools. Sometimes not entirely divorced from them, though. Don will share with us, and you'll hear from other panelists, that many microschool founders previously taught in the K-12 system, and many families grew up in that system. So, we think the spread of microschools is a really important vector to understand, including their opportunities and challenges, both for the families that opt into them and for the education leaders who want to deliver more flexible and customized and family-centered learning environments at scale. So before we start the conversation, I'll just share a couple quick context setting comments about the webinar series and today's topic. So as Sierra noted, today's webinar is part of a series that the campaign has done on the idea of parents as curators, and you can see those recordings from previous webinars on the campaign's website. And second, this concept of parents as curators is really not new. Parents make choices and curate their children's educational experiences during the early childhood years, before mandatory schooling, as well as a post-secondary pathway after mandatory schooling, whether that is through college, career, the military, other choices. In the K-12 grades, we've always seen a consistently small share of parents opt for private or public choice schools other than neighborhood schools or choose homeschooling. But now we are seeing more parents apply this curating to the space of mandatory schooling in grades K through 12, and the options that they can choose from are growing. So our speakers today will share why and how parents are pursuing microschooling and opportunities and implications for the rapid growth that we're seeing in this sector. So Don, you are our first panelist to speak. We'll also hear from Meredith and Lauren in this first section of the webinar. But Don, would you kick us off, please, to help us better understand the current context of microschooling? So how do you define microschools at the National Microschooling Center, what the center does, share some highlights from your recent research and report?
Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. So the National Microschooling Center works with microschools all across the country. Microschools are innovative, small learning environments, and when they're a multi-family learning environment and they're serving school-aged kids, we are more than happy to help. We've probably at this point helped more people launch microschools and be prepared to succeed from day one. So for anyone watching, if anyone in your circles or spheres has an interest in learning more about microschooling and maybe even starting one of your own, we'd love to help you. It doesn't cost microschool founders a dime. So because we govern education in this country at the state level, it's a source of eminent frustration to researchers that there's not one cohesive, specific definition of microschools there are in some statutes in certain states. But because, and we'll sort of maybe dive into this as we go, but microschools can be organized in different ways because they have to conform to the frameworks in the particular state in which they're operating. That's one of the two main drivers of the microschooling sector, along with just local interest and local demand. Next. Great. So microschools are a beautifully diversified movement that can look differently and do look very different in any sort of circumstance you could find. That said, absent a specific statutory definition, we are in the early adoption phase. I would say at about a 2% market share. That's about 1.5 million kids nationally who use microschooling as their primary source of schooling, although it can be unbundled and they can learn everywhere in lots of different ways, which gets you closer to 100,000 microschools operating across the country, and that can include homeschool co-ops, depending on the state that you're in. It can be, we have some states with highly regulated private school sectors, even though they don't often see a dime of public dollars. And in some states, it just makes more sense for microschools to operate as learning centers that serve families that follow the homeschool rules in their state. Next. So more microschool founders are currently or formerly licensed public educators. And we hear all the time from those. I mean, they're thriving in microschools just as much as the families are. And we have microschool founders that call us and say, can you believe this is the first week of my entire career I had lunch every day of the week, or I got tired of, even though I worked in the highest performing charter school in the state, I got tired of having to kick my classroom door closed so I could teach the way I knew my kids needed to be taught. So these are the different backgrounds and different life experiences that microschool founders have. Next. So we see 4 different types of microschools around the country. Independent microschools, which maybe serve 20 kids or fewer, sometimes larger, that more often than not operate in a commercial retail space, maybe office space, maybe nonprofit space. Partnership microschools can be, and I think that in terms of the growth of the sector, this is what we're really starting to see. They can be a host partner who can be an employer, who can be a house of worship, who can be a municipal government or a local library who works with a technical partner who's on the education side, who's responsible for the teaching and learning. We see all sorts of really exciting partnership microschools in this way. Provider networks, they are organized in all sorts of different ways with all sorts of different value propositions, but Acton Academy is a popular one, Primer, Brenda, and they work sometimes regionally, and it makes sense in a lot of times for a founder who might be an experienced, accomplished educator, but has never started their own business before, especially in the beginning, to work with a provider network in some, maybe they get their back office services. Maybe there are different parts of the value proposition that they do pay a cost for. But particularly in ESA states, they've been a big part of the recent growth. And most recently, the center hears from a lot of school district leaders, superintendents, charter school leaders who are interested in what public microschooling can look like. And because innovation is still very much very much happening now, that it can look like lots of ways that we could show you today, or look probably very different, next year. Next. So who do microschools serve, right? This is not about dispensing privilege. In the early days of, the pandemic shutdowns, and you read the New York press, you would worry, are these things equitable? Are they any good? Microschools that now, though, and the center does an annual sector analysis where this research comes from. We're currently surveying 1,000 microschools around the country to get data like this. But when we ask microschool founders, only 12% of microschool founders serve families. Most of their families are above the average income from their area. It's much more common. 18% of families served by microschools are slightly below the average income for their area, so within 20%. And 21% are significantly below the average income from their area. So microschools are very much about working families and their needs. And we do very well at the fragile end of the income spectrum and families with a child with neurodiversity and what have you. Next. So where do kids come from who are attending microschools? Where were they in school before? More than anything else, kids come to microschools from district-operated traditional public schools prior to coming to their microschool. So these are not families that had ever identified as non-traditional learning families in any way. Small amounts come from public charter schools or private schools. And more than that comes from families that had homeschooled before. But more often than not, these are families, whether or not they choose to become a homeschool family and follow those frameworks in their state, that's who's coming to microschools, which is one of the reasons I find this so fascinating. Next. So when we ask founders, and these are weighted scores, when you create and operate your microschool, what are your most important desired outcomes? Academic growth is number one, which is different than academic proficiency or snapshot proficiency or mastery, which is what so much of our public school performance frameworks are built around. After that, growth in non-academic learning. A child's happiness in the new setting is one of the most important desired outcomes for microschools. After that comes academic proficiency or mastery, grade level mastery. Skills perceived as needed for their future, and finally, faith or values-rooted outcomes. Next. And then a question that I love talking about is how microschools measure impact, right? Only 29% of microschools give regular letter grades. Observation-based reports, for those of you that are familiar with Montessori models, that might be the most familiar model of observation-based reports. Likewise, portfolios. Tracking mastery, results from embedded assessments in learning tools. So in this golden age of digital content, many of the world-class learning tools that microschools use have embedded assessments that are perfectly good for measuring the longitudinal growth of individual kids over time, which is an important indicator for many microschools. Tracking non-academic learning, and that's fascinating in lots of ways. The center does a lot of work there if anyone would like to discuss that. Administering surveys with parents at least twice during a school year, and we've been working with some terrific researchers on the value of what those surveys can talk about, particularly maybe showing growth or compared with their child's previous academic settings. After that comes administering standardized norm referenced or criterion referenced assessments, and you can see where that falls, about a third of microschools. And then the others next. So thanks. And the National Microschooling Center works with founders all across the country, red states, blue states, purple states. And if anyone in your circles wants to start a microschool, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Don. We'll have some discussion as a group soon, but Meredith, would love to have you come on now to share some thoughts. So Vela is a leader in the microschool space, helping to shape the growth and impact of the sector. Curious for you to share with us about your work, what you're excited about in regard to the microschooling sector, and what you see as opportunities for growth, including some of the trade-offs that microschools face between public funding and flexibility.
Sure thing. Thank you. So, what does it mean to own your education? Next. Vela started as a simple idea back in 2017. We believe that families and educators wanted something different and were increasingly willing to take charge of education, to truly own it for themselves. Well, that idea was launched as Vela in 2019 when we welcomed 3 founders into our network. At the time, people thought we were a little bit nutty. They were probably right, but the world changed and we were ready for it. Today, Vela is the largest network of education founders in the country. They are courageous people who offer some form of low-cost private or home education, and they do this, importantly, with very little government or philanthropic support. This is the power of the private sector at work, and what we observe every day are the effects of disruptive innovation. Now, the good news is that this disruption is a bottom-up movement, and it's one that's grounded in the values of free people who are offering a wide variety of solutions that families want, that are giving their kids a foundation for a good and meaningful life. As of today, Vela has grown from those 3 original founders to include more than 4,700 founders in all 50 states. Our founders have benefited more than 5 million learners in some way. And during this time, Vela has awarded nearly 45 million in grants to founders. 80% of our founders are sustaining their operations based on tuition. All right, so why is this happening? I'd like to share some observations from the field. Next. We are living through a paradigm shift with respect to ownership of education. Like shifts that are happening in other sectors of our society, such as health, people are no longer satisfied passively receiving what's been prescribed for them. They have the right and the responsibility to pursue education that fits with their lives, that fits with their values, and they are going after it. They are pursuing it. There are underlying societal factors that are influencing this shift. They include things like dissatisfaction with the status quo and with institutions, which has never been higher. Technology, which is changing the game for delivery of content and reducing the minimum efficient scale of operations. The reality of people who are delaying their first childbirth and they're having fewer kids. Parents of school-age children are older and more established than prior generations. In fact, and I bet most people don't know this, but 73% of households with school-age children are led by adults over the age of 35. Grandparents are increasingly involved. They are sacrificing their time and their money to support their grandchildren. The AARP surveys show that the top priority, the number one priority of grandparents for their grandchildren is financially supporting their education. Okay, so how are these societal factors affecting education? Well, we have some observations from the field that we know are not very popular among elites, but this is what we see on the ground in real life. Number one, we see that parents are willing and able to invest in their children's education. This is a movement of low and middle income parents who are willing to sacrifice their hard-earned time and money. Number two, we increasingly see that parents want to spend more time with their children during their childhood. They want to be more engaged. Number three, parents are willing to compromise accepting partial products. They are shifting away from schools that are objectively better, offering a full suite of services to every student in every circumstance. They are switching to partial solutions that may not offer that full suite, but are better for their unique situation. Okay, next. So what does this mean for Vela? We've been able to welcome 4,772 founders in all 50 states into our network. Next. We've had a lot of growth over the past few years. You can see we started in 2019 with 3 founders, and we're on track to welcoming 6,500 founders into our network by the end of next year. On average, on a weekly basis, we are seeing another 31 founders join our network. Now, much of this growth is happening through word of mouth. Up until 2024, we had never spent a dime on digital marketing or on any kind of marketing activities whatsoever. We didn't even have an internal marketing person. Okay, what does our network look like? Well, the majority of our founders, about 75% overall, lead learning environments. Those founders are supporting about 435,000 learners. About 5 million learners are served through scalable infrastructure that's supported by the founders in our network who are providing those types of academic and operational supports to this unconventional space. And then finally, we've seen a ton of media coverage. Our founders have featured in more than 1,000 mainstream media stories. These stories, they provide the social proof that normalizes how people are pursuing alternatives to traditional education systems. Next. Vela serves 3 primary constituencies that include founders, families, and supporters. We provide seed funding to founders. We offer networking, connections, and self-service on-demand resources for both founders and families. And we provide a way for supporters to invest in locally grown, authentic education opportunities in their local communities. Next. We're also excited to announce the launch of our mobile app, which went live 8 weeks ago. This platform provides self-service on-demand resources for our founders and the families who want to find them. For the first time, Vela is providing direct-to-family services. During our first 2 months, we onboarded more than 3,000 users to this mobile app, including more than 700 families. Instead of just a one-way search where parents look for schools, over time, the Vela app will allow founders to pitch themselves directly to families. We're very excited about this feature, which is scheduled to go live in our app in January, just in time for parents making decisions about the next school year. All right, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Meredith. We are going to turn to Lauren now to bring in another sort of lens on this conversation. So Don and Meredith both really painted a picture of a vibrantly diverse and growing movement. Lauren, you and your colleagues have studied microschools at Rand. And you published a paper earlier this year that revealed just how difficult it is to assess students' performance in microschools, since many students in microschools don't participate in the state or national assessments that are used in public schools. Curious for you to share with the group, what have you learned from this research and how are you now thinking about approaching your research on microschools, including any recommendations for microschool leaders and founders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, including families?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chelsea. Yeah, I'm excited to share the research that RAND has done in the microschool space so far. Our microschool team includes myself and my colleagues John Schweig and Sarah Oles. Our most recent paper on microschools that Chelsea was just referring to just came out last week, and that shares a title with this title slide. It is called, "Is it possible to determine the effects of the microschool sector on students?" And we use this paper as a sort of cautionary case study for what may happen when applying traditional education policy research methods to this very unique and diversifying education space. Next slide, please. You can go ahead and fill it in if there's transitions. Great, thank you. So for our first microschool project at RAND, we kind of considered the work to exist in two phases. So the first phase was published in March, that's this paper. And we first had the goal of better understanding and describing the microschool sector, and then offering considerations for researchers who are interested in this sector. So in this first phase, we did a systematic literature review, and we conducted original surveys and interviews with microschool sector leaders, many of whom Don introduced us to. We found that there is tremendous variation in microschool models, and there is little to no systematic data on these schools or the students who attend them. We also find that microschools are often making personalized, individualized decisions about how to assess student performance on a case-by-case basis. And this has major implications for quantitative research in this space, because quantitative research and impact studies rely on comprehensive and consistent data. Next slide, please. You can also fill this one in. Thank you. All right, so in the next phase, which is the paper that came out last Tuesday, what we decided to do was sort of take a stab at one of these microschool impact studies. So we decided to try to find the best available data we could on microschool students and apply the best available causal research methods to measure the impact of the microschool sector on student outcomes as compared to a control group of traditionally schooled students. So to be clear, this paper is not really about the impact estimates. It's really about the challenges and limitations of using these methods in the microschool space. So throughout the paper, what we try to do is essentially walk through the steps of a traditional education policy impact study, and along the way, be very explicit about the limitations that we come up against at each step of the process. So for this paper, we partnered with NWEA, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. It's a large national testing company. We used their MAP growth research database. So we identified microschooled students in their database, and then we also created a virtual comparison group of traditionally schooled students in their database. In terms of impact, we found negligible differences between microschool and traditionally school students of less than 1 point difference in math and reading growth. However, given the extensive limitations that we came up against along the way, we do not assert these impact estimates to be valid, and instead we focus our findings on the reasons why they are not valid and the limitations of the available data and methods for studying this emerging education model. Next slide, please. Great. So given the extensive limitations that we lay out in the paper, we conclude with offering recommendations for various stakeholder groups. First, researchers. We recommend that researchers very clearly and comprehensively articulate the limitations of their work in the microschool space. It is common practice to address limitations in research papers, and we are suggesting that researchers go beyond the typical practice of including a limitations paragraph or something like that at the end of the paper, and instead make the limitations more front and center wherever relevant. And we've tried to model this sort of approach in our paper. And this will ensure that the work is better understood by consumers and also is applied more responsibly if microschool research is going to be used to inform decisions. We also recommend that researchers collaborate with practitioners and stakeholders to design studies. Relying on pre-existing large-scale administrative data sets, which researchers often do, is not going to be very fruitful in this case. So in order for this research to improve, it needs to be aligned to the unique values and models of the schools that are being studied. And it needs to be informative for microschool leaders. So these partnerships can facilitate comprehensive data collection in a way that's mutually beneficial. So microschool leaders can get useful information about how they can improve their performance and for communicating externally to stakeholders. And researchers can gain valuable information to disseminate knowledge to the field because so many folks are interested in what's going on with microschools. Similarly, for microschool leaders, as the sector expands, and particularly as it is more able to benefit from public funds, there will inevitably be more interest and curiosity in the sector's performance. So sector leaders should work together to develop a shared vision and a common framework for what outcomes analyses might look like in this space. And I do want to acknowledge that this type of work is already underway in a lot of places with working groups that are convened and facilitated by folks like Dawn. We also realize that standardized performance measures are in many cases not aligned to the deinstitutionalized ethos of the sector for many of these schools, right? And so we don't want to assert that standardized assessments will be right for every microschool. However, we do encourage leaders to consider the trade-offs between their school's values, their reasons for being a microschool, and adopting some standardized outcomes as part of the whole portfolio of information that they collect about students. Standardized performance data certainly does not tell the whole story. But it is a great way for schools to monitor performance, communicate to parents and other stakeholders in a format that is digestible and familiar to them. And performance data can also be used to seek further enrollment or further funding, and oftentimes is required when seeking external funding. For policymakers, and again, as it becomes increasingly possible for microschools to accept public funding as a tuition source, policymakers will be compelled to increase the level of scrutiny applied to the sector, right? So in doing so, they must consider the trade-offs between microschool values and public accountability, between regulating the sector and allowing the sector to innovate. This is going to be a very delicate balance to strike, and policymakers should be very aware of the extent to which additional regulations may be burdensome enough that they preclude some smaller microschool operations from being able to continue to operate. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Great sort of teeing up of a discussion that I think all of us here can have. So Meredith and Don, you can come on video again, and we have a few minutes for sort of a group session, and we'll answer some of the Q&A questions before we go on to our panel of microschool founders. So the first questions that I wanted to put out there for the group are actually some nuts and bolts questions that are coming through in the Q&A. So For example, how are microschools different from homeschooling? What are some of the reasons that families choose these options? If perhaps it might mean that they're saying no to some of the more like bundled resources that a public school would offer, or even a more resourced private school. And would one student attend multiple micro schools or, only one? And lastly, I know Meredith, you answered this in the chat, but sort of what is a founder when you talk about founders? So Don and Meredith, if you can like kind of give us some nuts and bolts basics.
Go ahead, Don. I see you jumping in.
Okay, oh sure. So again, because we govern education at the state level in this country, we talk about homeschooling like it's some sort of biblical right, but in fact, it really only became formally legal in this country until the early mid 1980s, and the rules for homeschooling vary pretty greatly from one state to another. Likewise, states that have particularly regulated private school sectors that you might not otherwise expect, North Dakota, Nevada, on the other hand, Maryland and New York, that maybe that you would expect. So people create their microschools around the demands of their families and the interest there, but also the frameworks within their particular state, and try to do it in a way that, because especially when you're working with families of a child who's following the homeschool rules, the family then really, like Meredith was describing, become an active partner in the child's learning trajectory. And that sort of active learner paradigm really goes a lot to how to define what the dynamic is in microschools, and the way that it's different than in traditional learning.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different labels that are out there, right? And it'll be interesting to see what ends up ultimately sticking, because to me, some of these labels they're almost like a distinction without a difference, right? And so we prefer to think about the margins on which differentiation occurs. So what we see among founders and families is that they are rethinking the use of space, they're rethinking the use of time, and they're rethinking the use of labor, like staffing or talent. Where does it come from? Who provides? Right. And so those are the margins that we see differentiation on. We also see various governance models, right? And so our schools, places, or learning environments, places where parents essentially drop off their child, and then the child is the school, the provider is responsible for the educational journey. Or does the parent own the transcript, the scope and sequence, the educational process in partnership with the provider, right? And so you see governance is also a margin on which you see differentiation. We kind of like to call this indie private education, because that's what we think it is. It's not like, this is not your father's private school. It's a different kind of private school. It's very indie. But you know what? We'll see what label sticks over time.
We can put that one in the running.
That's right.
Lauren, I'm assuming that you had to define microschool somewhat clearly for the study. Could you share a little bit about how you did that,
Yeah,
at least in the study?
that's a good question. I will say that in terms of an agreed upon definition, I 100% agree with the other panelists. We have not put one forth in our research, and we have continually been asked to do so by our peer reviewers, but there is not one to settle on at this time. For our study, what we did was we did a comprehensive internet search of all 50 states to find any micro schools we could online that had a public online presence that identified themselves as a micro school and were operating. And so we made a comprehensive list of that, of schools that we knew identified themselves as micro schools in writing. And we gave that list to NWEA, and then they were able to look in their database to see which schools they had in their database.
Great. That's helpful. I want to ask a question a little bit more around this question of impact. So, Don and Lauren, I think this might specifically be for the two of you. Don, based on your research at the center, how do you see you gave that slide or sort of about how microschools measure impact. Can you talk more about how microschools balance understanding both academic and non-academic growth for students?
Yeah, so in lots of different ways, and I would say that broadly speaking, so many microschool founders are just downright sort of ingenious at measuring their impact and demonstrating it in the ways that matter most to their most important stakeholders, to their families. We are doing a major measuring impact initiative for this school year with 60 to 70 microschools around the country that Dan Hamlin from the Harvard Kennedy School is leading, that measures impact for microschools, and the leaders can opt into three different areas: human capital, social capital, and cultural capital. And we can, we're using, for example, for reading, we're using IXL, and we're looking at the longitudinal growth of individual kids over time, which is a thing that you can do with IXL. And you know, Lauren and Rand has been terrific in showing that you can, with validity and integrity, use the embedded assessments in many of the world-class digital learning tools that microschools are using, if you do it correctly. If you do it with, you don't omit any child's test scores, and you do it in certain ways that are perfectly great ways to show their parents, that it's quite common for microschools to average, a year and a half of of reading gains over the course of a school year that can be tracked in those ways. We have microschools that use NWEA map or use IXL or use different ways of doing things. And also there's a lot that, if you do it in the right way, you can capture using survey data. So those are some of the prevalent ways that microschools are measuring impact. But again, there's so many of them doing so many different things.
Great. So that's a great sort of tee up to Lauren. I'm just wondering if you can describe, when you were looking across many microschools, not just at individual microschools, can you give us some more specific examples of some of the challenges that you came across in trying to execute a more traditional ed policy impact study of microschools?
Yeah, so I can give an example. So we did create a virtual comparison group on the data we have, which means that we did create that comparison group as matches on students' demographic characteristics and baseline test scores on NWEA map. As Don was just saying, microschools are using all sorts of tools for measuring all sorts of different outcomes, right? And we selected NWEA as our partner because in the first phase of our work, NWEA map was the standardized assessment that was most often referenced by the schools that we talked to that they were using. So one thing we do not observe in the data, in the NWEA data, is the reasons why students are opting into microschools in the first place, right? So we can imagine that there will be systematic ways that microschool students are different than traditionally schooled students, which we do not observe and therefore cannot account for. So this means that it's possible that any differences we see between microschool student academic achievement and their control group academic achievement could be due to some other factors that we don't observe. Any number of things you can imagine: family values, student motivation, mental health. And we have no way of accounting for the ways that those other unobserved things are related to a student's propensity to enroll in a microschool. We also know that, or suspect that, students and families in microschools who choose to participate in NWEA MAP may be systematically different than the families in the sector that are choosing not to engage with standardized assessments at all, right? So even if we are able to look at the students that are choosing this assessment specifically, we're not able to then externally validate those conclusions to the broader microschool sector at all, because that might look very different than the folks we were able to capture who are participating in this particular test.
Great. Really helpful. And just kind of double clicking on this tension sort of between what Lauren is describing as the limitations of traditional studies and then what Don is describing as the sort of myriad ways that, on a site-by-site basis, microschool founders are looking at evidence of outcomes. A really interesting tension we can maybe dig into more later. Meredith, I've got another question for you. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was about to say something.
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
and I don't want to minimize this. I think it's really important. So when we look at the founders in our network, 93% of them are serving more students today than when they joined Vela. And the reason for that is that they are delivering on the academic growth and personal growth goals that are demanded by families. Right. And so you have low and middle income people who are sacrificing their hard earned time and money to pay for something that objectively on its face offers less than the free neighborhood solution. And so I would argue that if these founders are not delivering on the academic growth goals that families are having, probably not going to pay for it. And what we see is that 93% of them are coming back. So these founders are earning their trust and they're earning their repeat business.
I think we're going to pick up on this thread later in the conversation. Let's, for the moment, bring in our two microschool founders to the conversation. So we'll have a little bit of a second panel here, and then the whole group will come back together to dig into some of these naughty questions. So I would love for Stephanie and Mary Jo to come off video. Stephanie and Mary Jo are both founders of Microschools, Stephanie in Mississippi and Mary Jo in South Dakota. So Stephanie, we'll start with you. Can you share a little bit about yourself and what led you to start a microschool, and then tell us all about your school?
Yes, thank you very much, Chelsea. Well, again, my name is Stephanie Harper, and like most microschool founders, I have been in education for over 26 years. I started off as a teacher in the private and public, and eventually went to the public school setting. And while as a teacher, was began recruited out of my classroom uh, to begin to train teachers and also join an organization where we will travel all over the state of Mississippi to help transform low-performing public schools. So in my educational arena, our focus was really on working and at, as we call, hard to teach schools. And so throughout that process, however, about 16 years ago, my late husband and I was gifted from a gift from above. We adopted from birth our daughter. And not knowing that at the time, as we're traveling around the state of Mississippi to help transform schools, that gift from above would actually have a learning difference. And of course, we didn't discover it until a few years as she got older, after adopting her at birth. And one of the things that upon adopting her, my late husband and I committed to doing three things. Number one was making sure we choose a place specifically that will collaborate or partner with us in our faith. Number two, as it relates to her, to help her understand her purpose in life. And then also find an institution that would also partner with those same concepts. And as being in the public school arena, oftentimes I was very familiar with the conversations sometimes when students have a certain label placed on them, as if that label was referred to as a challenge to teach that student. And that was one of the things that we were very committed to, that my daughter will not go through that situation, but that they will understand, whoever the teacher is or the school will value our child and pull the knowledge in her purpose. And so as a result of that, we had the opportunity, because of my educational background, once we discovered one of her learning differences was dyslexia. As a parent and an educator, I was able to be her advocate, meaning I had the opportunity to choose the educational environment for her to learn to communicate with teachers from both a parent point of view, but also from an educator point of view, to ensure that they will partner with us in making sure she fulfills her purpose. Well, a few years later, as I was also remaining in the public school, training teachers and students, and also choosing a different environment for my daughter, I would also have other parents who would also need an advocate. So therefore, I began to advocate for them just like I did my daughter. But eventually, when my daughter turned about 8 or 9 years old, no, actually middle school, the school that we found was a amazing place for her to receive her education actually closed. And it was during that time, my business partner literally said, "Hey, you're being fighting for other children, you're being fighting for your own daughter. Now it's time for you to start a school." Especially now that the school that she was attending was getting ready to close. And so that was the journey start of Harper Learning Academy, because Harper Learning Academy is actually named after my daughter. Next. So, as I stated, our mission and vision for the students at our school and for the parents was one, to help our students discover their purpose. Again, we're a school of faith. So, we teach our students that everything about them in which they were created was created on purpose. And that purpose was to make a change in the world. But whatever label that was given to them as it relates to their learning ability that would disempower them, we totally removed it. As a matter of fact, we actually teach them that their learning difference is actually their superpower. And so what that did was able to transform their thinking as it relates to their self-perspective, but also we had to train parents to uh, who were used to hearing these labels in the traditional setting to help them understand that every child can learn, but they can only learn in the correct environment, and that is to discover the children's superpower. And so we teach our students to that the superpower is only amazing when you are able to use it to transform communities and also how to partner with the others. Next. So, as you can see, these are our four principles: purpose, positive self perspective, prepared, and partnership. And as we look at each of those, these principles are also the way we also measure our growth as it relates to students. And so our academic areas, along with their self-perspective and social emotional growth, are all measured through these four principles. Next. So our pedagogy approach to education. Of course, we are a small school. We have approximately 20 to 21 students. Our curriculum is project-based curriculum. However, to be very specific, we do teach academics as it relates to the basic reading and math skills. However, once the students are taught those skills, eventually those skills now are measured by a problem or a project holistically as they implement those different areas. Next. So our demographics, like I said, at this time we have 21 students, 20 African American, one white, 13 females, 8 males. Many of our students, their learning differences are ADHD or ADD, dyslexia, and we have about 3 students who are on the autism spectrum, but more so on the high end. And the reason why we use the term learning difference, because some of our students also are students who academically perform 2 to 3 grade levels above. However, they prefer small, intimate learning environments versus a traditional large classroom. So their learning difference is simply that this type of environment meets their need more than a large traditional environment. Next. Um, so why do parents choose Harper Learning Academy? Just as I stated before, when we even talk about the small classroom size, the beauty of having a micro school is that the culture of our school, and even to a certain extent, our approach is designed and can look unique each year because we design it according to the need of the student. So the parents love that individualized approach, whether that's looking at the child's learning modalities, but also personality traits. But also as a result of that, the children feel safe in those environments. And then there's a true partnership between the parent and us as we not only speak of the goals in our learning environment, but we also develop goals as our children begin to move from our school environment to another school environment also. Next. I think we're at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's wonderful hearing more about your school, and now I'd love to invite Mary Jo on video. And Mary Jo, so same question to you. Can you please share with us about yourself and why you started a micro school, and then tell us about your school?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first and foremost. Yeah, my name is Mary Jo Fairhead. I'm the founder of Onward Learning, which is an innovative private school near the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Um, I guess I started Onward after being public school. I moved home to be a teacher in the public schools, and then I was. You can go back to the first slide. I'll go over this here in a minute. So I was a public school teacher and then a public school principal on the reservation, and I was a principal through the pandemic, and that's really the time that pushed me sort of out just to do something different. I saw a lot of kids needing a lot of different things, and they weren't getting those things, and I had, I thought becoming a principal would have the opportunity to make the necessary changes within my school to give the kids the best shot that I could. But I was faced with a lot of hard things. And the pandemic was, I guess, what kind of pushed me out completely. And also, my daughter is dyslexic. We didn't know it at the time, but she was really struggling in the public school system and was not getting what she needed as well. And so I started Onward. Today, just a little bit about Onward before I go into our area and what challenges we're dealing with. We serve 40 kids ages birth to 8th grade, and we plan to expand to 9th grade next school year. 85% of our kids are Native American, 100% qualify for free lunch, and 25% are neurodivergent learners, including my own daughter. So you can go to the next slide now. Thanks. So to start, I'd like to share a little bit about the challenges of our area, and then I will share a little bit about our model and the progress we're seeing. So many may not know it, but the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota is the poorest area in the entire United States. And along with that comes a lot of really hard things. Our life expectancy is only 52 for women and 48 for men. And our teen suicide rate is 3 times the national average. We have a really high dropout rate. And then academic proficiency in our public schools across the reservation is anywhere from 10 to 28% in English, 7 to 17% in math, and 7 to 21% in science. And those numbers that say 7 to 17%, those are actually, I'm not real sure what the bottom end of that is, because our state data, if it's anywhere below 8%, it puts a star on their data. So I just know it's below 8%, so I put 7. So as you can see, our kids are struggling, and we've been pushing more money at the schools for decades and not seeing results. And what I am attempting to do is provide a smaller learning environment for our kids so that they have more of a shot, really, at academic success, but just to help with their emotional and mental well-being as well. So you can go to the next slide now. So dealing with these issues my whole life, as a child, I grew up here as a teacher, as a principal, and now as a founder. I just decided to forge a new path with Onward Learning. And at Onward, we as a team, developed 3 pillars of love-based, student or child-centered, and community-led. And what those mean is basically with love-based, so many of our children come to us with a lot of trauma and just a lot of things that either have gone on in their life or is currently going on in their life. And so we wanted to create an environment that felt more like home than an institution. And really what ended up happening with, which was not intended, is I didn't have a facility. I couldn't find anywhere to put the school. So I ended up moving out of my house and putting the school in my home. And so it was really easy to make it feel like home since we put it in a home. So we know that our kids can't learn if they're in survival mode, right? If they come to school and their nervous system is jacked, they can't learn. So first and foremost, every day we start outside in nature to try to regulate the best we can with nature. Our kids love it. We love it. It gives us a chance to walk around and see where they're at, how they're doing, and just really be present with them. And then we come inside and we have a local mom who cooks a home cooked breakfast. We all sit together. We have a meal together. Again, just trying to gauge our kids and get them settled and see where they're at and how they're doing. So we spend a good hour every morning just settling in, and that works really well for us. Let's see. So then with student-centered, every one of our kids that has come to us from another school has been at least 1 grade level behind, sometimes 2 or 3. And so it's really important for us to assess them as they come and see where they're at academically, emotionally, and mentally, all those things, even physically. Sometimes we have kids that come to us that are malnourished. They maybe have a hard time, if they're neurodivergent or something, maybe they have a hard time eating certain foods, things like that. So we do a full assessment and interview. I call it an interview. It's more of a conversation with the families just to see what the kids need. And then we place them where they need to be based upon those needs, not based upon their age or based upon what their report card tells me. And what we've seen with that is when we put them where they need to be versus where society says they should be, we've seen incredible growth. And I'll talk about this on the next slide, but just math alone, I mean, if they're in 4th, 5th, 6th grade and they don't have basic math facts, it's really hard to teach them, basic algebra or things like that. So we really focus on teaching to where they're at, not where they should be. We also, with student-centered, we also take into consideration their interests. A lot of our kids are very artistic. They like to perform. So we have time every day for what we call curiosity classes. And those are ceramics, woodworking. They write and perform their own play. They built a zip line last year. Various different things. The kids love it. We love it. That works out really well too. We also incorporate the Lakota language, which is our indigenous language here. And we have a fluent speaker, and she's an elder in the community who actually is a boarding school survivor. So she brings with her just so much knowledge and experience and love for the language and the kids, because in the boarding schools, she wasn't allowed to speak her first language. And so now to be able to give back to the youth and teach it to them is really meaningful for her and for the kids. And it really means a lot to me too. So we're incorporating that as well. We do cooking, just a lot of hands-on stuff. The other part about the student-centered is we know that our kids anyways learn best in the morning after they've been regulated. So we focus really hard on our core subjects in the morning, and they work really hard for about 2.5 to 3 hours. And then the rest of the day is really the arts and things like that. And that seems to be working well too. So then that brings me to community-led. And community-led to some sounds like we got the community together and the community leads the school. But that's not necessarily what it means at Onward. What it means at Onward is that we are all a community, the students, the teachers, the parents, the board, and some community members. And we all work together. We all have a responsibility for these kids. And I don't want them to have just one teacher that they love and that they can turn to. I want them to have a community of support of adults that are healthy and that can support them. I also wanted to create a school. I wanted obviously to create a school for children to be healthy, but I also wanted to create a school for teachers where they could feel comfortable and be healthy. And because, I mean, as a teacher and as a principal, my teachers, I could just see the pressure and with the testing and always feeling like you're doing something wrong if you're changing what you're doing for your kids. And I didn't want that environment. I wanted to give our kids an environment where their teachers also feel comfortable, because if a teacher is dysregulated, there's no way that they can help a dysregulated child. So just really giving teachers the autonomy to make the decisions that they need to make for their kids, because they know them. They're the experts. So that's in a nutshell what community led means to us. We make big decisions together. We develop our schedule together. If our model's not working, we need to make changes in our curriculum. It's all done together. Next slide. So the progress, the proof. The first couple of years, it was, I didn't know if it was working. It felt like it was, but we didn't really have a whole lot of data. We're in our 4th year now, and we have data now of kids that have been with us for a year or longer. And on average last year, as a whole, of all of our kids, including our neurodivergent learners, or our learners that were on IEPs last year or before they came to us, we saw a growth of an average of 1.5 years in reading and almost that in math, and which is incredible. And then on the other side of it, not only are they growing academically, but mentally and emotionally, we're just seeing incredible growth there too. I mean, we've had kids that have come to us who were getting every recess taken away and put in a room basically all day because their ADHD was so uncontrollable. And we just don't have those issues. And because of that, the demand for what we're doing has grown substantially. So we plan to build a bigger building. We're in the process of building a bigger building so we can serve up to 100 kids, which is a lot of children in our area. For comparison, our local elementary school has 170 kids. So that's exciting. And then we've also just recently established a partnership with the county next door, which is on the reservation, for expansion across the reservation. And our goal is to provide an innovative alternative school in each of our 9 tribal districts, so that the public school system has an alternative option for kids that may be very bright, but they need a different environment. So we're really excited about that. The goal is 900 students within the next 6 to 8 years. We'll see how far we get with that, but it's pretty exciting stuff. Before I move on, I did have, you can go to that one, that's fine. I did have a quote from a letter from one of our parents that I wanted to share, just to kind of give you guys, if you are thinking about starting a micro school, to give you some hope of what's possible. So it says, our son loves school again. He is making friends and thriving in his favorite subjects. He enjoys making pottery, being outdoors, having the freedom to learn in a way that best suits him. He's making friends and being shown that ADHD does not define what he is capable of achieving. He is showing that he's confident and he can do this. He wants to learn and how to be his own amazing. I'm so proud of the responsible boy he's becoming at school and home. Our son comes home full of positive energy and every parent's favorite, no homework. We don't assign homework. As a parent, I was overwhelmed with the constant phone calls, notes from teachers on my son's behavior, and meetings with the staff on how to better my son's behavior. Onward Learning took one look at my public school problem child and said, challenge accepted. Since transferring, I've had 0 problem calls and multiple proud calls. The staff described my children as smart, loving, determined, and wonderful children. It has been a relief to find teachers who are genuinely interested in each child and their unique skills as an individual. Okay, the next 2 slides I think are going to be discussed a little bit later on as well, but I wanted to kind of give my perspective from Onward and my experience. So on the innovation side of things, I'm often asked, what could be implemented in public schools that you're doing that's working? And I think there's a lot of things that we could implement in our public schools, and I would love to see it happen. One is multi-age classrooms. The benefits are endless. We have, like I said, we have babies all the way up to 8th grade, and they love learning with each other and from each other. I could go on and on about the benefits of multi-age classrooms. There's nowhere else in the world that I can think of anyways, where you put people of the exact same age all in the same room to learn something because of their age. Yeah. And then the relationship-based environment. So putting relationships and the emotional side of things first, and then the academics come. I mean, some people may disagree with me on that, but especially in areas where trauma is a real thing, and these kids have hard lives. If they don't feel emotionally connected to the adults in their life, the teachers in their life, they're not going to learn at the pace of those who do. Um, and then just like the whole child approach. So recess time, we have in our local school district, they get 2 15-minute recesses in preschool and then expect them to sit all day. It's like we could incorporate more recess time. We could incorporate healthier food. We could have smaller student to teacher ratios. We could incorporate more play-based learning in our younger grades. We know what works, and we can do it. So next slide. Yeah, there we go. So opportunities for micro schools and challenges for micro schools. When I first started this, I didn't know that anybody else was doing this. I went to the Vela conference, and not last year, but the year before, and I was just like, I'm not crazy. There are other people doing this, and it's amazing. So opportunities for micro schools, the innovation that can happen is beyond comprehension. If you go to a conference like that, you will see people doing so many different things in so many different ways, but in being very effective in serving kids with a student-centered approach. Micro schools allow for smaller class sizes, and like I said, more student-centered approach. They allow for teacher autonomy, and like was said earlier, many of my friends and the people that have left or have started micro schools are those who have left other education systems, and it's giving them a renewed sense of purpose and love for learning as well. The conference was the Vela conference. So earlier you heard from Meredith. She's from Vela. Leaders in changing the educational landscape of our country. Micro schools, I feel like, are changing the educational landscape of the country in a huge way, in a good way. And I'm excited to be a part of that. Challenges are always financial. How do you fund your micro school? We fund it very differently than others do. We have a partnership with our tribe. We now have a partnership with a local school district. I can't charge the tuition it would take to run my school, but many can, and that's a very good way to fund your school. Bottom line is, financially, you have to have a business plan. You have to be able to pay your teachers and pay for your building. You don't want to start a school and then close a year later. Have a plan. Facilities is, in my area, it's an issue because there just really aren't facilities. In other areas, it's an issue because maybe there's zoning issues or there's laws or legalities that they're having to follow. Other challenges is curriculum and assessment. There's just so much out there. Choosing what you want to do can be overwhelming, but you can always, always ask. I don't know how many hours I've spent just talking to other founders of what they're using, how it's working, and seeing if it might work for us. Let's see, recruiting teachers and then recruiting families. So teachers are, sometimes they're scared to leave the public school system. But the cool thing about microschooling is you don't necessarily need a certified teacher in a lot of instances. You might just have a really passionate parent, and that's okay. I have myself certified and one other teacher certified, but the other two are not, and it's working just fine. And then recruiting families sometimes can be a challenge as well, but you really have to get your goals and your vision solid and build that trust. And the way we recruit families, or we did at the beginning, is we had summer programs. So we did sort of a come and try it out summer program, and that worked really good. So that's all I have. I think we're going to transition.
Mary Jo, thank you so much. And thanks both to you and Stephanie for sharing the reasons why you started microschools. Both of you have really powerful personal stories that are driving the work that you're doing. So thank you for being here today. Your last slide perfectly teed up the discussion that we're about to have. So I actually, given the time, I think I want to invite all of our panelists back But I'm going to start actually just by asking Stephanie if you would build a little bit on what Mary Jo was just saying from a micro school founder and school leader's perspective. What do you see as some of the opportunities and challenges that are top of mind for you for the microschooling sector?
Yes, so I would say specifically, let's start with the challenges. Obviously, we are in Mississippi, and the concept of microschools is very new still. And it's similar to the question that I think some of the people who are watching now ask, how do you distinguish a microschool from a homeschool? Are microschools tutoring? Uh, Buildings or companies. And so that actually can be a challenge because of the fact that we in Mississippi, obviously, we have private schools already. We already have homeschools already. So why would a parent choose what we would call microschool? What makes your school different? And so I think that first challenge is being able to communicate effectively to people who are interested and help them see the unique distinction specifically in the community that we are serving. Um, uh, what was the other question you asked for me?
You said you started with the challenges. Do you see a
Yes.
particular biggest opportunity that you have in mind as you think
Yes.
about where this movement goes or where your school goes
Yes.
from here?
So the greatest opportunity we have, and it's really a point of growth right now, is being able to, as we are educating our community, now many parents and are in different areas of Mississippi, and also other educators and people, as they're learning more about these micro schools, they're literally wanting them to be designed in their neighborhoods and then in their communities. So while it was a challenge, is once they have received the information or is receiving, we're finding that an opportunity for the micro school environment to grow.
Thank you so much. So, Meredith, Don, and Lauren, let's bring you back in here. I'm curious about what you think we should be paying attention to as we think about the future of micro schools, especially kind of from a systems lens. So, we just heard from two specific school founders with really powerful stories and examples of work that they're doing in their communities. You're looking at hundreds, even thousands of these micro schools and demand across the country. Curious if you see ways for access to micro schools to become even more widespread, for their quality to be better understood or even more assured, and even for micro schools to help public schools evolve to meet the future and the demands in their own communities. So maybe that's a big question. One place that we could start is actually with the sort of finances piece. So Don, if you could share a little bit more about what you see as the challenges and also creative strategies that micro school founders use, and Meredith for you as well.
Sure. Well, Meredith is absolutely right that with those public dollars come responsibilities for demonstrating stewardship of the taxpayer dollars and other things that come with the use of public dollars. Microschooling is not a school choice play. We have incredible founders in, blue states that are not likely to see, private school choice anytime soon, if ever. That said, modernizing the regulatory frameworks. There's about five major regulatory buckets that microschools have to operate within, and these were just, and usually they're local. More often than not, they're local regulatory frame, regulations, and they were just come out of a time where nobody anticipated the popularity of this thing really taking off the way that it has. So I think with those, with those being able to be modernized in lots of different ways, and you see that, happen in different ways because so many different states frameworks are the same, that it's much more than a school choice play. And there's certain, some of the provider networks have really got backing behind them that targets the ESA states and different, the details of public policies matter. So we need to find ways within those ESA states that for instance, the requirements for accreditation can be made microschool friendly, that could be viable in an innovative small learning environment as well. But I think that the question is really much more about the frameworks that we operate in than so much just limited to school choice details.
Meredith, will you build on that a little bit? We have a couple of questions in the chat about like, how do you fund a micro school? How does this work?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so um, it's hard. It takes a lot of sweat equity and hard work. I mean, you guys know that too, because you've been there, right? And so let's start with that one. How do you fund a micro school? Most of these things, most of these small learning environments start very kind of organically. So it might start as a summer camp. It might start as a holiday, like a program over the winter break or over spring break or whatnot. Um, and then it kind of like grows over time into a learning environment that has more regular attendance. A lot of the formal learning environments we see started as homeschool cooperatives. So maybe you have like 3 or 4 families who decide that they're going to educate their children together, and they do it in someone's home or they rotate homes. But then after a year or two, the next thing you know, oh my goodness, they have 250 kids in a hybrid learning model and they've rented real estate, right? Or they're utilizing a community center, or they're using space in the Sunday school classrooms on Monday through Friday when church is not in session, right? And so it's like they come up with creative ways of doing it that tend to be very scrappy, very sort of low budget, just to make it possible. And so that's how we see a lot of these models emerge. And then over time, as they continue to build demand and they grow a wait list, then they end up, okay, well, do we need a longer term home? Facilities, the reason I'm focusing so much on facilities, we ask our founders when they onboard into our network, like, what are the challenges that you face from an academic standpoint that you would like help with? What are the challenges you face from an operating standpoint that you would like help with? And from an operating standpoint, I can tell you the order. It's facilities. It's always facilities, growing enrollment, HR and staffing, and what is my next one? Oh, it's killing me. It's escaping me. Hold up. I don't know. I'm missing it. But then like down the list is like legal and regulatory is another issue. But generally those are the things that they're thinking about is my facilities, my growth of enrollment, my marketing, and then my staffing situation. So okay, let me pivot to the government funding. So in the Vela network of founders, we ask them, do you receive government funding? Are you relying on government funding for your operations? To what extent? Are you relying on donations or philanthropy versus like tuition and fees? And what we find is that less than 10% of our founders are relying on government funding in any form. That's not zero, that's a lot. And I'm sure that will grow over time as policies are enacted in states that offer government funding for alternative learning environments. Now there's a blessing and a curse, right? Because if you're going to take public funds, then you're going to give up some of your autonomy. You just are. And because, there's a need for governments to be good stewards of the money that they're putting out there in the field. We totally understand that. So every founder has to make a determination of whether or not the benefits outweigh the loss of the freedom that they would have from an operational standpoint, right? And so some are going to pursue it. And absolutely, they're going to do it. Others are going to say, heck no, I'm never going to do that. And so we respect the right and the decision of the founder to make that determination based on their unique circumstance. Now, what I will say is this, how a policy is designed, and Don is right when he talks about 50 different state laws and everything is different, right? So if the law is designed in a way that it sharply restricts eligibility for the funding, when you think about the benefit of the subsidy that gets introduced, almost all of that benefit goes to the supplier versus the consumer. Conversely, if the law is designed in such a way that eligibility is largely unrestricted, then the value of that subsidy that gets introduced largely flows to the consumer rather than the supplier. So that's really important in policy design, because let's be real. Like I look in the Vela network, our median tuition is $450 per month per learner. So that's $4,500 a year. It's a lot of money, right? It's a lot less than what we spend in public systems, but still a lot of money. Now, if the introduction of government funding gives you $10,000, but then the price of the local micro school goes from 4,500 to 14,500, you're no better off. You're the same as you were before. And the value of that subsidy went entirely to the supplier rather than to the consumer. So we got to think about smart policy designs to make sure that the benefits accrue to where we would like for them to ideally accrue.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, and I want to try to weave together a couple of questions from the audience, all kind of in one theme. And you may have seen a quick poll pop up. So we're not quite done with the webinar yet, but we'd love your feedback. So if you have a moment to complete that poll before you leave in the next 7 minutes or so, that'd be helpful. So the couple of questions I'm seeing come through in the chat have to do with all kind of around the theme of parent information and helping parents to make sure that they have the right information to make choices about where their children are going in this in this theme of parents as curators. So I think I want to start with Mary Jo and Stephanie. Could you share a little bit about the information that you provide to families and the information that in your experience families most need in order to make a good educational choice for their children in choosing your school? And then Lauren, I'm curious after the two of them share if you just have any commentary to add there from a systems perspective about the information that parents need to make an informed choice and the information that's available or not for microschools.
Yes. Well, also, as I stated, my background is in education, and I am still connected to public schools as far as training teachers and so on with my consulting firm. So one of the things, and I'm bringing that, and I mentioned that because I am in Mississippi, we have the Mississippi Department of Education. So as a consultant, I have to remain updated with all the educational policies related to how students transition from elementary or K-12 education to also to college. So what we do when a parent is interested in Harper Learning Academy, we literally have an interview process with the parent. And what we do, we share about our curriculum, but we also share about what that looks like if they wanted their child to eventually transition from our school back into a different setting. So we'll speak to what that looks like in transferring back to another private school setting at some point or some even public setting, but eventually, if a parent is interested in college, we'll have that whole entire conversation with them during the interview process, which will allow the parent to then, before sending their children to us, to have an idea would this choosing our school be the best fit. Also, as once a parent does decide to allow their child to attend our school, throughout the school year, we will have a conversation as they get towards the end of the school year to follow up with the parent as far as do they want the child to continue to remain in our program, or are they interested in sending them to another institution? And if that is the case, we develop a transition process. So I give an example. If a parent now says, yes, we would like them to attend Harper Learning Academy for 2 years. The child is in 6th grade. However, they're now in 8th grade. And now we want to our desire is for them to transition into a public school, high school. Well, that gives us enough time to make sure that even the individualized program or plan for that child includes that transitioning process. Meaning, if we're already knowing that there is a certain entrance exam that it takes to enter that school, we'll begin to expose that child eventually to some of that curriculum so that that transition can happen seamlessly.
That's great. Thank you. And Mary Jo, maybe just briefly to you, what kind of information do you find that families want from Onward Learning when they're deciding to join?
Yeah, I found it very helpful. We have a sort of a side-by-side comparison of mainstream schooling versus Onward and what the differences are. That seems to answer a lot of their questions. We also do a similar process where we bring the whole family in for sort of an interview and just more of a discussion to get a better idea of what they're looking for and why, and just to make sure that their expectations and their reasoning for leaving the other school system is aligned with our beliefs and our values. We even take it a little bit farther in or further and invite the child and parent to spend a day with us too. And that allows for a lot more conversation and a lot more questions that they may not have had otherwise without that inside sort of glimpse into our day. So that's
Great.
kind of it.
Great, thank you. Lauren, I think you might have the last word here, but for many public schools, parents can go online and look at great schools or wherever and look up the rating of the school. We don't have this information for micro schools. What do you think the implications are for the sector?
Yeah, I mean, I really think we do live in a time when people want data to inform their decisions, right? Data can mean all sorts of different things and look all sorts of different ways. But the more data, whatever that looks like, that can be provided to parents as consumers, the more information that they have to be, better informed to make a better decision for their child. I really like the examples that Mary Jo and Stephanie just gave about all of the steps they take of what might not be the first things that come to mind when we think of data, right? The information that they're sharing and collecting from families as they go through sort of the enrollment process. I also think that this is a big challenge for the sector because a lot of micro schools are new, right? So they don't have years of historical longitudinal data to put forth, right, when they're starting up. They have an idea, they have a pitch, and they need to find folks that are the right fit for, what they intend to serve in the community. So so I think that Mary Jo and Stephanie's examples of that are great ways that you can sort of rethink data and the information that you have to share out with parents on the front end before you have any sort of post-observational data from students that have been enrolled. But definitely does sort of repin the importance and value of collecting some types of measures on students along the way.
Thank you so much. Great conversation, everybody. And Sierra, I'll pass it back to you for our closeout.
Sounds good. Thank you. And thank you everyone. What a great conversation. The chat and the questions were so lively. I think we have a new record for the amount of questions that were asked in a webinar. But it's great. I love that people are wanting to learn more and learn from you. And we really appreciate you joining us and sharing information about this for everyone. And I also want to give special thank you too to our wonderful moderator, Chelsea. Thank you for navigating through the conversation and getting us all situated. Really, really appreciate it. As a reminder, the webinar recording, the slides, the bios, any resources that were mentioned, and probably even some new ones, will be sent in a follow-up email later this week to everyone who registered for the conversation. So those will be coming. So really appreciate you in advance. And then also want to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars. I know we're a minute over, so I'll go quick. Next week, we will not be having a live session. Instead, we'll be doing a special holiday rebroadcast over on our YouTube channel. That will take place at 3 p.m. The following week on the 2nd, we will be continuing our Parents as Curators series, this time with a discussion on the implications of the new federal tax credit. And on the 9th, a fun doubleheader with the Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30 and a Learning Tuesday session at 3 p.m. And then on the 16th, a special sponsored session with the Fordham Institute within our partner series. So I posted all the links in the registration links in the chat box. If you miss them, they will also be included in the follow-up email. So just encourage you to keep an eye out for that. But I thank you all again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did from behind the scenes, and I appreciate you all being here with us today. Thank you and have a good afternoon.